My name is Laura McInerney. I'm the editor of Schools Week and I've been asked to come and chair this session, which has a rather wonderful title. Teaching is a profession, not a job. It's nice to go to a fringe event which isn't a question, it isn't sort of a thought piece. It says quite clearly, teaching is a profession, not a job. Discuss. So that's where we're starting from. We have a fantastic panel that's been put together by ResPublica, Million Plus Group and the NUT. What we're going to do is there'll be sort of this introductory bit. Then Nick Gibb, who is the Minister for Schools, is going to speak for between 5 and 10 minutes. We've then got the rest of the panellists will each have up to 5 minutes as well to speak. On my left I have Neil Carmichael, who is the Chair of the Education Select Committee, Kevin Courtney, Deputy General Secretary of the NUT, and Pam Tatlow, who is the Chief Executive of the Million Plus Group. We have also got a space for Toby Young, who is a journalist and now also the Chief Executive of the West London Free School Group. If he makes it, then he will be sat there and he will also be given 5 minutes.
You'll be lucky.
Lucky Toby. So to begin in terms of where this question has come from, I have a series of notes here, and what I'm going to do is just read them mostly as they are, and then I may make a few comments on them, because what it says here is, amidst a culture of assessment and obsession with exam success, our great teaching profession is under threat. I was a teacher for 6 years before I became an education journalist, and so I'm wondering to myself whether I agree with these statements or not. I think you should be thinking whether you agree with them as well. But it is a belief that it remains the most trusted of callings. Those who teach children rank far above those who look after our money and make our laws. Yet elsewhere the cracks are showing. Teachers are pressured from all sides, overworked with little reward and unable to focus their attention on individual pupils. It must be reconceptualised as not simply another job, but the noblest of professions. At the same time, there are some concerns at the moment. What's said here is 83% of educators report stress in the workplace, 89% have cited workload as a major concern. And overworked teachers simply do not want to teach. From 2012 to 2013, 1 in 10 teachers left state-funded schools, while teacher recruitment is apparently nearing crisis points. Certainly at Schools Week, what we uncovered about a week ago now, we did an investigation and we found that last year, more teachers, on top of the usual amount, more teachers went abroad to teach in international schools than actually did PGCEs in universities last year. That is quite a worrying statistic when you have a very low number of 16 to 24-year-olds, a very high number of 5-year-olds. So our need for teachers has never been greater, and yet there does seem to be a bit of a problem. So this event is going to explore how the situation can be resolved. Is there something about treating teaching more like a profession and less like a job that could help with that? Or are there other solutions? And that's what each of the speakers is going to now present to you, their case and their thoughts. Nick Gibb, if we could begin with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It's nice to see you again after just a few minutes in the previous fringe. I'm just worrying whether you're stalking me. And it's wonderful to be here with the rest of the panel, and it's nice to have more minutes to speak than Neil. As the chairman of the scrutiny committee, it's usually he who does the speaking. But can I first of all just say that I don't agree with some of the things in this thesis, because I don't think teaching as a profession is under threat. I think there has never been a better time to be a teacher than now. The opportunities are greater now than ever before. The opportunities for early promotion are greater now than ever before. The autonomy that is pervading the academies programme, and don't forget 64% of secondary schools are now academies with that autonomy that comes with it. And now teachers have the freedom and ability to set up their own schools. Like every other profession, teachers can now go into practice on their own or with other teachers and set up maintain a school in the state sector with its costs paid by the state. So I would say that now it is the best time to be a teacher, frankly. And as our understanding of exactly what makes a world-class education is changing in the UK, so is our understanding of teaching. In 2013, Dr. Ben Goldacre's report, Evidence into Education, suggested that teaching should become an evidence-based profession and that recognised the voice of teachers in forming what should be taught in the classroom and how. And raising the profile of the profession in this way has been central to our recent reforms and has acted as a catalyst for Research Ed, for example, and the Education Endowment Foundation, both vital resources for the future of teaching. And for a long time, teachers have been struggling under layers of rules, regulations and guidelines presided over by Ofsted inspectors, taught to grade teachers simply on how well they conform to a certain prescribed style of teaching, regardless of whether that style is working. The style I'm referring to is one that has permeated the English education system for decades, that of student control over learning, of individualised instruction and learning to learn. The idea that classes should be led by the child and that teacher instruction from the front is passive and therefore ineffectual. And this style, I believe, has been disastrously partnered with a curriculum, particularly the 2007 curriculum, seemingly devoid of real subject content and knowledge. Now, the rise of the work of academics like E.D. Hirsch and the emergence of strong voices from the grassroots of the teaching profession have gone beyond challenging this view of teaching. They have provided us with evidence that it simply is less effectual than other forms of teaching, and that actually teachers need to actively teach knowledge in order for children to progress. Yet as recently as 2013, research by Robert Peel for Civitas revealed that Ofsted inspectors still show a clear bias against teacher instruction and the imparting of knowledge in favour of child-led alternatives. And this inspector bias is something that we are working with Ofsted to change, and it is changing. Ofsted has made it clear that there is no Ofsted prescribed approach to teaching. What matters is the outcome. Now, it's evident that it's not just researchers and academics, but teachers who are using evidence to challenge this facilitator model of teaching. And for those that disagree, who feel that that is a good approach to teaching, to liberate the teaching profession, you first of all have to give permission for the other side of this debate to exercise the way they wish to teach, even if it contravenes that orthodoxy that is at the moment very dominant in the education world. Now, this government is on the side of teachers who are working hard to ensure the very best for their pupils. They are the professionals best placed to decide how and what is taught in schools. And through the Academies programme, we're giving this freedom back to them. Teaching is no longer a job where teachers should feel compelled to use practices that they believe don't work out of a fear simply of being graded inadequate by an Ofsted inspector. And this belief in autonomy explains why academies and free schools are the basis of our reform agenda and the recent education bill. Now, teachers at academies and free schools have a great deal more freedom to put new ideas into practice because they are protected, if they become academies, from the dead hand of local bureaucracy. Head teachers can determine how to reward and so retain the best staff, and teachers can work together to make decisions about the length of the school day, for example, or about their curriculum. And ambitious teachers can now transform existing schools or establish new ones, and thereby transforming their own roles as well as the education of their pupils. The new Education and Adoption Bill, going through Parliament at the moment, also allows us to tackle failing schools by shifting control from local authorities to those who know how to run excellent schools. Failing schools are simply not fair on pupils, and we need to tackle them as a priority. And for teaching to be seen as more of a profession than a job, it's essential that we continue to lift other burdens from teachers, including administrative ones. And our guidance to school has been cut. 20,000 pages of guidance have been removed, and we're working to simplify it further to ensure that pupils, not bureaucracy, remain at the centre of teachers' time. And the workload survey, with 44,000 responses from teachers, put data collection, marking practice, and lesson preparation time as the top 3 causes of excessive workload. And we've established 3 working groups out of the 11 of experienced teachers and heads to tackle each of these issues, challenging the need for excessive data collection, while of course at the same time continuing to be able to monitor the progress of each pupil, ensuring that deep or dialogic marking is used judiciously, while of course ensuring feedback to pupils is timely, but also ensuring that it's classroom based. And a third group looking at the resources teachers can use to help reduce excessive time spent on researching, printing and photocopying resources. But this thinking hasn't just been led by government departments or university research. It's been led by teachers, thousands of them, blogging, speaking and lobbying for change. They're transforming the profession and making it what it should be, which is a teacher-led profession. We're also working with them to ensure that teachers are no longer penalised for teaching from the front, for example, and that inspections focus on helping pupils reach their full potential rather than spending time with preparation and written lesson plans. If we're lending this freedom to teachers, then it only makes sense that our education system continues to be informed by them and to be informed by outstanding schools. And that's why we have developed and supported a number of schemes that are based around this school-led model. Teaching schools are a major element of our education reform plan. Teaching schools are outstanding schools that work with other schools to provide high-quality professional development and training to both new and experienced teachers. And this is supplemented with initiatives like the Talented Leaders Programme, which has been put in place to recruit 100 outstanding school leaders over the next 2 years to work in areas that traditionally struggle to recruit excellent teachers. And we're also supporting the expansion of Teach First and the Teaching Leaders Programme, the Future Leaders Programme. And this will ensure that the brightest graduates who have a passion for teaching are placed in the schools that need them most, and that teachers already in disadvantaged communities will be supported through effective training. And the Future Leaders Programme will strengthen this even further by developing the leadership skills of teachers who want to work as head teachers in the most disadvantaged communities. Well done, Toby. By developing a network of exceptional school leaders, we're transforming challenging schools and working to eradicate educational disadvantage. We're also giving good schools the power to teach other schools, and thereby fostering a system led by the teaching profession and not by government. We've also founded the Education Endowment Foundation to provide teachers with the evidence that they need about what works in the classroom and what doesn't work. And the hard work of teachers has allowed the Education Endowment Foundation to make great strides since it was established in 2011. And to date, it's awarded £57 million to 100 projects working with over 620,000 pupils in over 4,900 schools throughout England. And it's published 45 individual project reports, evaluation reports, all available to teachers free online. And according to a poll commissioned by the Sutton Trust earlier this year, 48% of secondary school heads and senior teachers and a third of primary school heads and senior teachers now use the Education Endowment Foundation toolkit when making decisions about classroom practice. It only makes sense that this evidence now shapes how we make our decisions about education. Recruiting teachers to the profession in this new environment is, of course, a priority for the government, and contrary to the criticism, we have exceeded targets for primary school teachers and we're making sustained progress in the secondary sector. It's always been more challenging to recruit teachers, of course, for subjects like maths and physics and foreign languages, but to tackle this, we've pledged up to 67 million to recruit more maths and physics teachers. Nearly done. Researchers in Schools is a small but powerful programme getting PhD graduates into our schools. And also now the quality of teaching and teachers coming into the profession is improving, with 61% of trainees, teachers with a degree of 2-1 or above in 2010. That has now risen to 73%. And we're also retaining more teachers. 87% of newly qualified teachers who enter teaching in the year after gaining QTS are still in post after 1 year, 72% are in post after 5 years, and 52% are still in post after 18 years. And this is a respectable retention rate for any profession. And to retain an even greater number, we have established an independent expert group, that's number 4 out of 11, to develop a new standard for teachers' professional development, chaired by David Weston of the Teacher Development Trust. And last year we also launched a consultation offering support, including financial support, to organisations interested in establishing an independent college of teaching to further recognise the importance of the profession. So this government does see it as essential to be on the side of teachers, giving them the evidence base and the freedom to teach in the way that works best in order to provide the best education for their pupils. And in this way, we will re-establish teaching as the preeminent profession, and where schools are the centre of academic life in this country. The best graduates are going into teaching, and year on year, I believe the prestige of the teaching profession is increasing. Thank you very much.
So, teaching is a profession, not a job, and it's being helped by the very many things that the government are doing to make it so. Next up for 5 minutes will be Neil Carmichael, who is the chair of the Education Select Committee, who will be scrutinising what the government's reforms are. Neil.
Thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here and also to follow Nick. We've been following each other quite a lot lately. Incredibly, we shared a platform in Stroud during the general election. So that's an interesting diversion, wasn't it? And then earlier this morning you and I were talking about religion in schools, and of course I frequently have a chat with Nick in the division lobby. But perhaps more formally in my role as chairman of the Select Committee when we meet. I think it's really important to talk up professions, and particularly the teaching profession right now. It is easy, always easy, to take the sort of the downside, the pessimistic side. But the reality is, of course, that a lot of people want to be teachers, a lot of people are teachers, and a lot of people are actually enjoying being teachers. That is actually a fact. Nick's statistics prove that. But if I go into schools, as I do in my own constituency and other schools as part of my role as chair of the Education Select Committee, I actually find teachers engaged, really happy to be in their classroom, proud of what they're doing, and keen to tell visitors such as myself what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think that is really encouraging. And it goes to really the heart of what our teaching profession is all about, because it is in fact professional and always should be. And we should say so every time we are talking about it, because that's how we're going to get over this hump, which sometimes is portrayed in the media and some other sources. Perhaps the NUT, I don't know. But it is absolutely critical that we are optimistic. And we are creating a world where teachers should actually be even more optimistic. Nick's referred rightly to the freedoms, autonomies that academies and free schools give to teachers. And that is absolutely fabulous. Because if you are in a profession, you should be trusted with your professional judgment. That's what I would expect a doctor to be, I would expect a lawyer to be, so I expect a teacher to be. So giving the freedom, the ability to make choice, the ability to make a decision in your way of teaching or your relationship with other teachers and so forth is extraordinarily empowering and absolutely the right direction of travel. But of course, the vision, at least my vision, is that we have academies joining up together, multi-academy trusts, more of them. And that actually gives teachers even more opportunity to expand their thinking, develop their ideas. Because of course, in a bigger trust, you'll be needing teachers of specialist descriptions, you'll be needing heads of department, you'll be needing teachers who can actually go up and would like to go up a career pathway. And the structure that a MAT gives actually does precisely that. So a teacher in that environment with those sort of opportunities should be really very confident about the future. Next, referred to the Independent College of Teaching. I think that's absolutely right. We've got to have a kind of a sort of a beacon of excellence, which such a college would effectively be. And I equate it to the Law Society or other structures in other professions, because they speak for those professions, they represent those professions, they promote those professions, they help to develop those professions. And I think that kind of approach is what we want to see more and more. So my direct and actually absolute answer to this particular question is absolutely we salute teachers because they are a professional. I'm also encouraged by Nick's emphasis on knowledge and the ability of transferring knowledge, discussing knowledge. I went to a lecture by E.D. Hirsch, funny enough, a few weeks ago. Nick was there, and he gave a typically good introduction speech as well. The fact of the matter is it does help you to know about things. Interesting, we were talking about this earlier today in connection with religious education, and so yesterday actually at another event on religious education, and I pointed out what was really basically fairly obvious. If you can't read, it's no use handing a Bible out and expecting a child to start learning about Christianity. You've got to know how to read, but you've got to know how to read because you're interested in and capable of absorbing knowledge. And that is a fundamental point, and I think that has changed the way in which teachers teach, and it has actually empowered them in the classroom because that actually provides a more flexible arrangement for teaching. Now, there are some issues. Recruitment and retention is certainly one of them. And let's not beat about the bush. I think there are issues about particularly maths and science subjects. Maths is, I think, something which we need to put some focus on. So the Education Select Committee will be looking very closely at recruitment and retention of maths teachers, and we've already asked the Secretary of State to write to us and explain the plan she has in mind, which she referred to the last time she was before our committee, because we need to know what that plan is, and we need to know if it's a workable plan. And you can be absolutely sure the Education Select Committee will be testing the plan, because we do have to improve our performance in maths.
You're at 6 minutes, so...
Right, well, I'm going to sum up by...
Perfect.
I'm going to sum up by saying through ensuring that teachers are actually capable of deciding for themselves, engaging with them about the subject, their curriculum and so forth, really gives them an opportunity to shape their world and be professional and promote themselves. So I am very optimistic about teaching and the teaching profession.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Next on our panel to speak is Kevin Courtney, Deputy General Secretary of the NUT. Kevin, your 5 minutes begins.
Thank you. And I'm very pleased to be here at the Conservative Conference talking on behalf of the NUT. I think dialogue really matters, especially between people who don't always agree. Talking things through matters. I was very pleased to share a platform with Nick at last year's Conservative Conference on the question of performance-related pay. As Neil said, we shared a platform on an NUT education question time in the run-up to the general election, and I debated with Toby in 2010, I think it was, before his free school was first set up. Very pleased to be on the platform with Pam as well. If I was in a trades union meeting, I'd want to move an amendment. I'd want to insert just. Teaching is a profession, not just a job. It is both. My union seeks to support teachers in both aspects. So the job aspects matter. The pay, the pensions, the maternity rights, the fair employment practices, all that matters in terms of recruiting teachers, holding them in the job. So they matter. But the NUT is proud to see itself as a professional association that also supports its members around professional concerns. We provide continuing professional development, we have innovations around curriculum, and indeed we find that our members engage with us more on the questions of pedagogy and curriculum and assessment, more on those issues than they do on other areas. So these things really matter to all teachers, I think. I would want to say that teaching is a profession, and that's more than just a craft, as well as being more than just a job. And that teaching is a complicated intellectual task. Being in a class of 30 children, it's not just behaviour management and the transmission of knowledge that matters to a teacher matters to the children in those circumstances. A profession, the professionals that we need have to be skilled and knowledgeable. They have to be self-reflective practitioners of their art. They have to be experts in their subject and in child development. They've got to inculcate in their charges attitudes as well as transmit knowledge. So we have to inculcate cooperation, entrepreneurship, a passion for learning. All these things are part of the teacher's task. And because the job is a complicated intellectual task, there are many other complicated intellectual tasks. I'm not saying teaching is the only one, but because teaching is a complicated intellectual task, in the NUT we think that initial teacher preparation and continuing professional development really matter in terms of quality the quality of teachers and the quality of the product that they then go on to produce. And for us, that really means that it's important that universities continue to have a significant role in initial teacher education. This is not, we think that's where most professions with self-reflective practitioners with complicated intellectual tasks get their start in their career. We think universities still matter. That is not a sideswipe at School Direct or at Teach First. Many School Direct programs have lots of university contribution in them, but it is a plea to all concerned with initial teacher preparation not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need that university contribution both at initial teacher preparation and in an ongoing sense with the profession. And there are some concerns developing that there's some initial evidence, and I think this would have to be looked at, I don't know whether it'll turn out to be true, that people training on School Direct might not stay in the profession as long as people who've been on university courses, and this needs to be examined, especially at a time of teacher shortages. So those things I think matter. I just wanted to say some things that I think are four things that I think are important in assessing whether teachers are treated as professionals, and I think these things all matter. And the four things I want to talk about are evidence that Nick has spoken about quite brilliantly, actually, about evidence, about continuing professional development, about autonomy, and about respectful, intelligent accountability. And I think there are issues around some of these that we need to explore. So Nick is absolutely right that teachers as professionals need access to the best quality evidence there is about teaching. But we also need the right to interrogate and critically analyse that evidence. And you also need to look at not just what works, but what the point is of what works. So you could have you could have evidence that teaching in this way gets the very best SATs results, but it might just be teaching to the test. So we can't just look at what works. We have to look at the wider effects of it. I will say, and this is a cheap point, the Education Endowment Foundation, which have developed lots of evidence, and I think I said this in the debate with Nick last year, they also say that performance-related pay is an expensive and not very good way of increasing teacher performance. So sometimes people look at evidence and they choose the evidence that they like, but evidence really matters, and the right of teachers to engage with this really matters. And I think many professions have struggled with the question of practice being led by evidence. Doctors certainly acknowledge that they've struggled with that, and it's something that's important for us. The entitlement to high quality continuing professional development is something that doesn't exist for teachers. If your child's school closes for an inset day, or sometimes people still refer to them as baker days, but the CPD that goes on those days isn't necessarily very high quality. Sometimes it's just talking about how you deliver something that a minister has called for. And I think it's important that we have continuing professional development with a significant degree of teacherly led engagement with it. And it's also important for colleagues to combine on that.
We are at 6 minutes.
We are at 6 minutes. I'm very sorry. Significant autonomy we need, and we do not have that in academy schools. We do not have teacher autonomy over curriculum, pedagogy or assessment. The NUT's surveys suggest that our members in academies report that they feel they have less autonomy than teachers in other state schools. So that's something that you will need to look at if your commitment to autonomy is correct. And I really want to say intelligent accountability matters, and we don't have an intelligent accountability.
Good ending point. Okay. Thanks very much, Kevin. Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but I think intelligent accountability matters is a strong final point to have made. Next on the panel is Pam Tatlow, who is the Chief Executive of the Million Plus Group. Pam, your turn now.
Thanks ever so much, and it's really a pleasure to be on the panel with other colleagues. Just to say, originally on the panel was our Dean of Education, or a Dean of Education who worked at Bath University, but unfortunately she's ill. And so you've got me. The reality is, however, I have taught and I am a qualified teacher, but hey, I would need a bit of professional development now. And I think that's one of the points that I want to pick up on. There have been some rocky conversations about the role of university education departments in recent years. And all I would say is this: I think if you want to have the professional development that Nick is passionate about and that the select committee has talked about, the previous select committee under Graham Stewart, then I don't think we can just do it on the basis of excellent teacher educators in schools. In fact, people who work in education departments of universities come into universities actually often with a considerable amount of professional practice under their belt. And I personally don't recognise some of the caricatures of teacher education departments. But the great thing about meeting tonight is, instead of indulging in a war of words about what we think happened 20 or 10 or even last week, we're in a dialogue about how we can move forward. And I think how we can move forward, and it's not totally clear to me that in fact all of the measures that Nick has mentioned and set up and triggered and been passionate about as the schools minister, and indeed in opposition, it's not clear to me that unless we do a bit more, we will avoid the kind of problems that are emerging around teacher retention and teacher shortage in some areas. Now, it may all work, but I would advise colleagues, if I don't mind, not to put all of your eggs in either a school direct or a teach first basket. We need to ensure that we've got professionals who are supported throughout their career to not only stay in the classroom, but to actually support excellent teaching, very diverse communities and very diverse groups. That's not an excuse, but just to say, I started my own teaching career, and you won't in any way encourage me to say what year that was, but I don't recognise all the things that Nick has said about classes being led by the child. My classes certainly weren't led by children. However, I've got to say, I started my teaching career in Cornwall. And, you know, we've got to be very careful that we don't impose urban solutions on our rural areas about how we deliver teacher supply. And that also means that I think there is a very strong role remains for teacher education departments to work with the government to see how we evaluate what works in terms of innovation, how we deliver more maths teachers in shortage and other subjects. But I've got to say, in some areas of the country, school heads will say that they're having trouble even getting English teachers, and they have given up advertising in some of those areas. And on the ambitions that the government has got around maths, for example, there is a distressingly large number of teachers who are teaching maths who are not qualified in maths. And I would just remind you that we work with Sheffield Hallam University and other colleagues, and I know you know some of the deans from there, but I would just remind you that at a university like Sheffield Hallam, they actually put through more undergraduates who become maths teachers than they recruit through the postgraduate programme. So we've got to think about innovative ways of doing this. So what do I want? Well, I want teacher educators of excellence in universities and schools to work together. I want people to work with ministers, and I also think we've got to have a professional development framework that is fit for the future. And that doesn't just mean better support for NQTs or recently qualified teachers. That actually means that you have access to professional support and you know what works. My last point is this, and I hope I'm within the time frame, because as an ex-teacher I quite like participation, right, from the audience. But I think there is one other evidence base that we need to pick up. We go to Shanghai, we look at maths, we look at phonics and so on. But some of the best countries in terms of outcomes, in terms of high quality teaching, are countries where university teacher education departments work alongside schools. And that happens in Finland, for example, to a much greater degree. So I don't think this is either or. I don't think it's silo-making policy. I think we've got to have evidence that's reliable and is evaluated about works. And I've got to say, we've got to move forward to what I enjoyed in terms of my professional life, and we've got to make sure that we never ever take the tingle out of teaching.
Thank you very much, Pam. And to be in no way an impartial chair, just for a second, I want to pick up on something that's been said a few times here, because I was a Teach First teacher. And just to be clear, Teach Firsters are taught by university tutors who happen to be working for Teach First. So if you get your qualified teacher status through Teach First, it is nevertheless done in conjunction with the university, and I think schools directors is in almost all cases. There's a few examples of MATs that are now becoming themselves a training provider, but almost everybody is still in some way connected to university. You may or may not agree with that, but that is how it is. Final speaker on the panel now with his 5 minutes is Toby Young. Toby, earlier I hadn't had a chance to say your job title, but I had you as Chief Executive of the West London Free Schools Group. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Fine. Then that is who Toby is, and he will now speak for 5 minutes.
Thank you. So yeah, I am the Chief Exec of the West London Free School Academy Trust, which has 3 schools in it at present, and we're going to be opening a 4th school next year. So I am acutely aware of the difficulties of having to recruit staff, particularly senior leaders. But to put this in context, I don't think that this is just a crisis in England, and for that reason I don't think it's right to link it to the education reforms that have been introduced since 2010. The crisis is actually worse in Scotland than it is in England, and there are no free schools or academies in Scotland. It's actually a European-wide problem, and it's likely to get worse as a result of the international refugee crisis and more children in Europe needing to be educated in the public education sector. I think some of the things the government has done and is doing are right. The support the government's given to Teach First, for instance, we've certainly recruited a lot of excellent Teach Firsters to work at the schools in my group, making it easier for teachers from Commonwealth countries to get permission to work in this country. That's also been very helpful to us. I think granting teachers more autonomy, such as doing away with levels in key stages 1 and 2, so they're no longer so prescribed to about how they should teach. I think that's been helpful and will ultimately prove professionally empowering, though it has sown a little bit of uncertainty and confusion temporarily. I think another welcome development is decreasing the frequency of Ofsted inspections. I'm a strong believer in the combination of local autonomy and public accountability, but I think the frequency of Ofsted inspections was a problem for schools. The amount of time teachers, particularly senior leaders, spend preparing for Ofsted inspections is ridiculous. They spend far too much time on that, and it was a relief to discover only a week ago that one of the free schools we opened in 2014 isn't going to be inspected in its 5th term, which was the convention, but is now not going to be inspected until the 3rd year, which is it's a huge relief to us. So it means we don't need to bugger about preparing for that inspection. Our 5th term is from next January. I think what else can we do? Well, I think one thing you can do is relieve teachers of some of the workload they're currently burdened with. And I remember a teacher telling me that one of the first things you learn as a teacher is that you never get to the end of your to-do list. And to me, that enabled me to that really put it in context. I mean, they just never manage to do everything that's expected of them, and they have to learn very quickly how to prioritise. And I think transferring some of the workload to back office staff is one way of reducing that burden, and that becomes more affordable in multi-academy trusts where some back office functions can be centralised and streamlined. And I think in due course it may be that some of those jobs, not the jobs that teachers do, but some of the jobs that support staff do, can be done by intelligent machines, and we're already beginning to see the use of technology in reducing teacher workload when it comes to things like timetabling, data tracking, even report writing. I think one innovation I would suggest would be to make postgraduate teaching qualifications more rigorous and make them take a little longer to get. So 3-year courses instead of 1-year courses, and much more subject-based. So I think teaching would certainly command more respect as a profession if the credential you had to earn in order to become a fully qualified teacher had more respect, was more prestigious. And I think the way to make it more prestigious is to make it longer, make it more robust, make it much more subject-based, so teachers become masters of a subject before they start teaching it. Now, that doesn't mean that I think we should restrict the teachers who can work in schools to those who've got this new, more time-consuming qualification, because that obviously won't help with teacher recruitment. I think schools should still be permitted to employ teachers who don't have QTS, but I think the market would encourage teachers to take up this more rigorous, more time-consuming credential by offering teachers who have that credential more money. So that would be my proposal, to introduce a much more professional, robust, and ultimately more time-consuming PGCE course. Thank you.
Before we open up to questions around the room, I just wondered if there's anyone else on the panel who'd like to pick up on anything anyone else has just said.
Well, there is this, I mean, we'll come, I'm sure, in discussion, but this issue that Kevin raised about autonomy, that teachers have less autonomy now under academy trusts than they had when they were in a local authority school. I think that overlooks what we mean by autonomy in some ways, because what these multi-academy trusts are doing, particularly the successful ones, the most successful ones, is really having a central vision about the schools in the trust, and that central vision is, in the best academy chains, is devised by the teachers themselves. So the history teachers get together, or the heads of history get together, and decide how they're going to improve history teaching across the trust. Now, you could argue that then, if they then roll that out across the trust, there's less autonomy for every individual history teacher. But the approach to history has been devised by the history teachers as a body, and what they're doing is trying to spread best practice through collaboration. So these multi-academy trusts are in practice what we've all been talking about through rhetoric, which is about collaboration within the profession to raise standards, and that's precisely what is happening in the best trust. And I think it is the vision that Neil was really talking about the future direction of schools. And I think that is a good thing for the profession. It's how every other profession operates. It's how accountancy operates, it's how the law operates, it's how medicine operates. And I think it is the right approach for the future.
Kevin?
Well, I mean, some of that's reinventing things that were previously there. When I was a local authority teacher, I taught physics at Camden School for Girls, and we met with the science teachers at Haverstock and St Richard of Chichester and the other schools. We had inset days where we were all released, and we were doing precisely that collaboration. My point was that on surveys we do of our members working in academies, and these are people who've chosen to work in academies, perhaps, or maybe they were there when they converted, but they report feeling less autonomy than teachers in the other state schools. So I think autonomy for teachers really matters. Autonomy on the issues of curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, but teachers are not reporting it. Maybe they do in Toby's school, but in our surveys they're not reporting that. And I think that's linked to the problem of accountability. So this is, I mean, the problem, accountability for teachers should be based on professional respect fundamentally, and it doesn't feel like it is to teachers at the moment. It should be based on professional respect, and then it should be proportionate and based on trust. By professional respect, I mean that a head teacher talking to a member of staff, or a head of department talking to the member of staff, clearly there's a management relation between the two of them, but they are both professionals. Both people should have a viewpoint in the conversation. The same thing between an inspector and a head teacher. But we see many examples where a head asks for your planning, your marking, and there is no dialogue attached to that request at all. It's a sort of policing action. They want to, and now if you think there is a problem with the teacher's marking, you should ask to see it. But if you think there's a problem with the teacher's planning, you should ask to see it. But should you ask every teacher to give their planning in at the same time on a Sunday? Well, I mean, there's a gentleman nodding. I think it's a fundamentally mistaken thing to think that you should do that, because the big problem is that you've got to plan for 5 days. You can't plan for Friday afternoon on a Sunday afternoon because of the inconvenience to the other human beings. So if you make them all hand it in, you'll find people have given you a plan that they don't actually teach, and it's unintelligent accountability. We've got to crack that. It's Ofsted, I think that's the root of it. So I'm in the strange position of, I think, agreeing with everything that Toby Young said. I'm not absolutely so. I want to look back over everything that he said. But
I'm just about to ask Toby, actually, because you are the person on the panel who is currently running an academy trust. If your history teachers all got together and said, it's great that you, CEO, think this thing, but actually we think something separate, do they have the autonomy to toddle off and do that?
Well, the trust, which sits above the schools, isn't at all dictatorial about detailed curriculum matters. We've employed head teachers who share our commitment to a knowledge-based curriculum, and therefore we trust them to oversee the development of their curriculum across all the subjects within their schools, and that quite often involves the heads of departments devising or revising a Key Stage 3 curriculum or a Key Stage 2 curriculum, and no, they don't even, far from asking me permission, they don't even tell me about it. I mean, I know because my daughter's now at the secondary school and it takes history, so I sort of find out about it that way. But no, there's no sort of top-down dictation in that respect at all.
We have, I know that Pam in particular, you need to leave.
Really sorry, I have to get the train back to London.
You need to leave by 8:30. So what we're going to do is I would like to take sort of 3 very quick pointed questions if possible, and then we'll get through as much of the panel as possible. Pam, if you need to leave at a certain point, then we'll arrange that. But questions around the room. I don't have a roving mic, so I can just pick anybody. So I'm going to go here to begin with, the gentleman here, and then I'll kind of come back and have a look on this side in a minute.
So I'm Mike Parker. I'm from the Director of Schools North East, which is the only regional schools network in the country, representing 1,250 schools in the North East. I think this is a fascinating debate, brilliant that we're having it. I'm interested in how the panel sees us broadening the appeal of teaching as a career, both in terms of meeting our objectives around teacher capacity, but also how it fits in the wider agenda of schools business engagement. Because certainly in the North East, one of the, and I'm sure it's the case for other areas, there is a concern around school engagement in business and readiness, getting young people ready for the world of work. And the sense that children are being taught by people who don't have an understanding of that world of work. And to me, I think Teach First is a fantastic initiative, but I wonder if there's capacity for something like Teach Next. So what do we do with people in the North East where we've had large-scale redundancies, what we've got with Redcut as an example currently? What do we do about tapping into talent that becomes available at certain times? And also, how do we use flexibility to get teachers working in industry and vice versa? There's a really good piece by Charlotte Avery from St Mary's School in Cambridge today, a blog post, where she's talking about releasing teacher time in STEM subject teachers to go into industry so that they can engage in that way, and vice versa, bringing industry into the classroom.
We should let science teachers, who we've not got enough of, go into factories. Is that what
But the point is, if you're bringing more people in from industry, from those science sectors,
okay, so it's
actually you're growing capacity and you're growing a shared awareness of the world of work and
Thank
and
you.
the
So how do we broaden the appeal, and can we have two-way flow? There was a question here.
Yes, I'm Abdul Mateen from the Isle of Wight Conservative Association. The Education Secretary thanked her teacher during her speech today. I thank my teachers every day because my teachers were quite educated enough to find other jobs, but they chose teaching, and I couldn't speak a word of English, and I'm here making my contributions because of my teachers. Teachers need to be protected from attacks, from the threats of violence. Sadly, teachers have been killed, and attempted murders of teachers has been made. Government needs to take note of the fact that we are grateful for the kind education our teachers devote to us, and we are here, and we can only do our little bit so that the future for teachers is as safe as it is possible. Thank you.
And one more over here.
Oh, thanks very much. Nick Hillman, I run a small think tank called the Higher Education Policy Institute. So I was going to make a point and a question. I was going to endorse what Pam was saying about, as a former secondary school teacher, about university-based ITT. But as you said, asked for short, snappy questions. I want to ask something else, because I am a former secondary school teacher, and I do run, I'm a policy wonk in higher education. But this week I've become the governor of my son's primary school, state CFE primary school, and I wanted to know what advice the panel had for me, because I know literally nothing about primary education, and now I'm on the government body.
So we've got three questions there. How do we broaden the appeal of teaching or get teachers moving in and out of industry? Is there anything we can do about teacher violence? And then also advice on primary governance. Pam, do you want to take your pick?
Well, I've been a governor myself, Nick, and it changes all the time, so I'll let other people deal with that. On the Schools North East, I think it's a very well made point. There are one or two things about the recruitment routes into teaching where are a bit challenging. So, for example, for the last few years, we've had to have electronic, if I can put that, skills tests in literacy and numeracy. And I can't tell you the number of times that people kind of don't quite make the grade on those. And I think that's a form of pre-assessment. I've got to say, they've already got their GCSEs, they've already got all of the grades that you would expect them to have. So they go in with all of those grades, but they're presented, and that is particularly the case. I think it's very challenging for people are going into teaching later on. So there are some things there, and also people who are applying to go at 17. So there are some unintended consequences about some of the routes. Universities have had a lot of pressure, quite rightly, to respond to the employability agenda of their graduates. And their teaching methods and methodologies actually are informed by that a lot of the time, because our outcomes are partly informed by that. And so I think there's a lot of mileage between getting teacher education departments and what they're doing together with colleagues in the rest of the curriculum to do these things. The problem is, of course, time is short. So unless you're doing an undergraduate an undergraduate course, on the postgraduate course, you are out in schools for most of the time. And the problem in schools, to pick up your ambition, is that schools are not always in a position to release people that get the supply cover to kind of go and do the things that you're talking about. So I think this is an agenda worth pursuing, but we've actually got to think about how we invest in it and how we make it work for, because actually some of the most successful programs have been where we can take people who live in their own communities, who are going to work in their own communities, and who are going to inspire people in their own communities, and are not going to move away after they've done their first 2 years of teaching. That's the way to boost teacher excellence and performance and attainment.
Nick,
yes, school direct salaried is a key way of getting career changes into school. It's an expensive route, but it's very effective, and it's meant to be for those people who are changing careers. Returners into teaching is, again, a hugely important route into boosting the numbers of teachers we need every year as well. Just on this governor thing, when I visit primary schools, the things I look for, first of all, I like to see what the phonics check results is like, because that tells you a lot about the quality of the teaching of reading in a school. I also, when I visit a primary school, like to go into years 5 and 6, and I like to ask the children if they know their times tables. And you can tell a very effective primary school if every child knows the tables. You have to be gentle, make sure that they. But if you can get up to 11, 12, and every child is telling you the answer, this school has got them, is pretty good in sort of sorting the maths out. And I also like to talk to children in years 5 and 6 about their general knowledge as well. You can ask a lot of questions about their knowledge of geography of England, of Europe, and their general knowledge of history and various things. And again, if you do it a lot, as I do, you can compare and contrast one school with another, and it tells you absolutely everything that you need to know about a school, I think, as well as looking at behaviour and so on. But one piece of advice: please do not do that in the classroom of your child, because I had the misfortune to be in a classroom in Canada when we were living in Canada for a couple of years, and one day my mother appeared as a supply teacher, and I tell you, it is the most excruciating day I spent in my whole school.
Neil, you've done a lot of work on governance.
Yes, I have.
So
It's a good question, Nick, because obviously what we want in governing bodies are people with appropriate skills so they can bring to the table, the strategic advice that was necessary, the ability to hold head teachers to account, the ability to actually provide a kind of a mission for the school where teachers feel valued, feel that they can do as they think is appropriate in the classroom. And all of that and more is really what a governing body with good governance should do. But fundamentally, of course, it is leadership and management that makes schools capable of doing those things, and that's what the governing body has to contribute to. I just want to talk about the North East bit too, because I am obsessed with this lack of linkage between the world of education and the world of work. I come from the North East, but the reality is it's all over the place. And we do have to tackle it, and I think that it is important that schools generally start interfacing with business. But business has a responsibility as well, because it is a two-way process. Schools need to know what businesses and professions need, and schools will benefit from that, but businesses have got to play their part. The one thing I would say is yes, I think people should actually think about going into teaching after a different career, and I think there are some good news here. One is obviously if you're relying on sort of a knowledge-based approach, then if you've got that knowledge through another source, but it's still good, worthy knowledge, then that gives some strength to it. And as Toby has really been talking about with his idea of a 3-year PGCE, which I think is attractive, and he actually used the phrase earlier, subject-based. Now, so that means a chemist from a factory in a research department could easily become a teacher.
thank you. Kevin, I wonder if you want to speak up just on the violence point. How do we protect against violence? It's something that unions have talked about in the past.
Well, there are three very good questions, and Abdul's question is a particularly good question. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't exaggerate. A teacher died last year, and that was a terrible thing, and a teacher died a few years ago in West London, but these are pretty unique circumstances. The teacher was then unfortunately stabbed this year, but these are schools are still predominantly very safe places to be. Behaviour is an issue for teachers, and in the survey we recently did, some teachers did cite poor classroom behaviour as a reason why they were thinking about leaving their profession. However, it was completely dwarfed in that survey by the questions of workload. So it isn't the biggest issue facing teachers. We welcomed the behaviour czar being appointed, Tom Bennett, who's a teacher that we know in East London, who's got some advice, and but I think a lot of I think we know a lot about how to make schools safe communities, and it's important that that's a focus of continuing professional development.
And Toby, did you want to pick up on?
Yeah, on the behaviour point, Abdul, I do think that is very important to teachers, and as Kevin says, is sometimes cited as a reason why teachers find teaching quite difficult. I think that some reforms the government has made have helped, so making it easier to exclude persistently badly behaved children, so it's a less cumbersome process, less wrapped up in red tape than it was. It's still pretty difficult. Making it easier to hand out same-day detentions, this new policy whereby children who have persistent unauthorised absences can be fined. I think all of those things help a bit. I think granting schools more autonomy, one of the corollaries of that is that schools can try out different behaviour policies and develop behaviour policies that work, and other schools can learn from best practice. So for instance, ARC's behaviour policy, ARC is one of the most successful multi-academy trusts, is very good, and we've adapted it for use in our schools. I thought the point about more links with industry in the North East, interesting, but I know that if I was to propose to any of the head teachers in my multi-academy trust that I wanted them to pursue this initiative, they would groan and say, it's a nice to have, but it's not a priority, and they would place it in the circular file, i.e. the bin. But I do think that one potential route of solving or helping with the teacher recruitment crisis at senior leadership level would be to put a program in place that enabled people who were successful managers in other professions to be fast-tracked into senior leadership in the teaching profession. And I'm actually meeting with Anthony Selden, the new Vice-Chancellor of Buckingham University and the head of the Buckingham University Education Department, to discuss what that program might look like and whether it's a program that could be offered by Buckingham. Anthony Selden's very interested in leadership and is going to be introducing a leadership program in any event, and we're going to talk about whether there could be a variant of it precisely aimed at managers in other professions who would like a change of profession, go into teaching, and could potentially become effective head teachers in about 3 years.
Thank you, Toby. And one of the things as well of the 11 working groups you mentioned before, Schools Week recently did a guide to the 11 working groups that are happening in education at the moment, and 2 of them are behaviour based, I believe. One was behaviour in teacher training, and now one is behaviour in the classroom. So there is a lot on the go with that as well. We actually only have a few more minutes left. I know that I've been asked to make sure that we leave a little bit early. Pam obviously had to leave, and she said that she has left some business cards. Also, as we're sort of getting smaller, it might mean that there's more time to grab panellists at the end and have a conversation anyway. So with that in mind, I was just going to take one more question, and then if we can just each sort of maybe build this question into final closing remarks, that would be great. And
5 or 6 bits.
Do a quick round of 3, you think? Well, they're going to have to be really quick. I'm going to give you
short
all of a
answers.
minute, and I'm probably going to start, I don't know, waving at you. 1 minute for a
Okay,
question.
thank you. My name's Bob Burgess. I come from Crawley. I was a teacher. I retired in 2003, but I started my teaching in 1969. Great university, Leeds. I had a great teaching practice, a really inspiring teacher who taught me, as well as teaching the pupils, he taught me the basics of teaching and how to teach and get the message across. I then went into my very first school, and I was told, here's the syllabus, get on with it. Yeah, so I had no help at all. It was a case of basically sink or swim. Fortunately, they realised that if I was going to sink, it would look badly on them, so they did help me.
And so the question is?
No, but then the politicians got involved.
I'm going to urge you to move towards this question.
References being made to Baker days. The politicians then got involved in education far too much. And my plea is, my daughter is now in education.
And your plea is?
Give
I think the
teachers
plea
a
is
life.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much. Over here, and the lady here in the...
Hi, Laura from the Telegraph. Toby briefly touched on Ofsted, and I know because my mum's actually a teacher and they're always complaining about Ofsted. Is Ofsted fit for purpose? Is there an alternative, or should teachers stop complaining?
Thank you. Well done on question. And I'm going to go to the lady over here.
Amy Gray. I am an ex-Teach First teacher, and I also stood for election in Hackney North as a Conservative candidate in May. I sometimes think about maybe going back to teaching. I'd be a much better teacher now than I was 10 years ago when I first started teaching. I've worked in FTSE 100 business. I'd be able to bring all sorts of experience from different working environments into school if I went back to teaching. But one of the reasons that I feel like it's maybe not the immediate thing I want to do is that I don't think, as an out and proud Tory, I would be very welcome in lots of staff rooms, and I blame the teaching unions for quite a lot of their rhetoric. Why is it okay to be overtly anti-conservative in staff rooms? It happens a lot. It happened in my own staff room when I was teaching. I wouldn't have felt able to openly profess my political opinions. Why is that okay? What can we do to make it easier for all of our teachers to express different views?
Fine. So as we move into our final comments on teaching as a profession, not a job, there's a few things there to pick on, which are lesson plans. Should we be giving them to people? Should we lay people, or should we lay off on all of the directives? Is Ofsted fit for purpose? And shy Tories, are the shy Tories particularly true if they're teachers? Because I can tell you, when we've tried to find some to talk to us for the newspaper, it is very, very difficult. You would believe there were no Conservative teachers whatsoever.
I was a Conservative teacher for 30 years and I never had any trouble from colleagues.
I feel this now sounds like an AA meeting. Toby, let's begin with you and we'll work
My
our way
name's
back.
Toby and I'm certainly a Conservative educationalist. I think you're absolutely right. It was shocking that Catherine Birbalsingh lost her job so shortly after addressing a Tory party conference in 2010. If it's any consolation, teaching isn't the only profession in which you have to be fairly tight-lipped if you're a Tory. One initiative which I think may help a bit is a new website called conservativeteachers.com. I've just contributed to it, okay, great. But I think one way to kind of make it make Conservative teachers feel less inhibited about their political beliefs is to let them know how many other Conservative teachers there are out there. I take your point about politicians keeping their nose out of education. I think it's difficult. It was an argument made in 2010, shortly after Michael Gove became Secretary of State. You can't introduce all these initiatives and expect teachers to continue to do a great job. All these changes, all these reforms are going to overwhelm the teaching system and are going to make everyone's lives a lot more difficult. I think if that was a valid argument then, it's a valid argument now, and it's an argument for not trying to turn the oil tanker around and go back to a system more like the system we had before 2010. So I'm curious as to whether Kevin Courtney accepts that is actually an argument for not reversing any of the coalition's reforms or this government's reforms, but giving them a period of time in which to bed in, allowing teachers to get used to them.
Kevin.
So Bob is a Conservative teacher, the gentleman here is a Conservative teacher. We have branch officers of the NUT who are members of the Conservative Party and here at this Congress. Whether they're shy enough to, whether they come out as NUT conference, I don't know. This might be unpopular, but we didn't make Michael Gove unpopular with teachers. Somehow Michael Gove was very unpopular with teachers, and that wasn't our doing, and I think the party needs to think about why it's unpopular with teachers. Ofsted, I think, is part of the problem, and that is not particularly the Conservative Party's fault, but Ofsted is not fit for purpose. It is seen, policing needs respect of communities. Inspection should have the respect of teachers, and it doesn't. Teachers do not respect the inspection service. They don't believe it's helping them to be better teachers. It's not fit for purpose. You heard Nick Gibb say some very harsh things about Ofsted in his contribution earlier on about them spreading the wrong sorts of practice. We need to take some lessons from that, because Nick thinks they're spreading progressive teaching practice. There might be some evidence for that. We know that they're spreading this triple marking thing, which is an insane marking system. We know that they're at the heart of the fact that when primary teachers take practical maths sessions, many head teachers, I'm sure not Toby's, but many head teachers tell them to take photographs of the practical maths session and stick them in the exercise books. So stay up late sticking them in because otherwise how would you be able to prove to Ofsted that you did the practical maths sessions? This is insane. Now, it's not necessarily Ofsted doing that, but fear of Ofsted is doing that. So the inspection system is broken. We have to be accountable, but we have to reinvent the inspection system because it's broken and it's driving teachers out.
Thank you. It's slightly paradoxical. One question was about politicians being too interfering in the world of education, and the third question was somebody didn't want to go back into teaching because of her political views. And I think actually that kind of sums up one of the issues that we've got. It is just too politically toxic. We've allowed it to become too politically toxic. And what we should be doing really is concentrating on trying to find solutions where we can more agree on. And I think that if you take the higher ground, that will happen. We want higher standards for our children. We want professional teachers. We want autonomy for schools. And funny enough, autonomy for schools is actually less politics. We've got to accept that. It is an obvious consequence of it. I'd like to see a classroom where political debate took place, and I'd like to see a staff room where political debate takes place, because I think the ability to debate and exchange views is actually part of the growing up and knowledge. And so it is certainly, I think, consistent with having different political views in a staff room and being able to express those. And I think that it would be tragic if that were not the case, and in one obvious situation it might not be. My message would be, we want to take the politics out, and funny enough, one of the things we've managed to do is that through actually academies and free schools, because of course local authorities are political functionary bodies. In the old days of local education committees and so forth, that's actually a political scene as well. We shouldn't forget that. On Ofsted, I think you've got to think of Ofsted as part of a process of accountability, which includes, thankfully, the government's decision to move towards checking what a coasting school might be. Because I think that is a much more effective way of testing some of the issues which we should be concerned about. Because we do have schools in rural areas and coastal areas which probably have been and still are coasting. And I think the government is absolutely right to think about how a coasting school can be identified, and then to think how that school can be dealt with quite quickly to get it back on track. Because funny enough, one of the failures we've had over the last 30 odd years or so, and certainly recently, is local authorities, when they've found a school wanting improvement, they really haven't always acted quickly enough, and then the situation has deteriorated still further. And I think Ofsted, in some places, has actually managed to help identify those sort of schools, and that's good. But I recognise that there are issues through the quality of inspectors and inspections that should always be checked, and that's what we were doing, funnily enough, on the 9th of September. No, sorry, it's 14th of September, when we had Michael Wilshaw before us. The one comment he did make was, broadly speaking, we're asked to inspect virtually everything, and that was when I was asking him what he was thinking about further education colleges, because I can't see in my own mind how a small primary school can be inspected by the same type of inspection as a big FE college, and I just wonder about how that can be properly done.
Thank you. And finally, on the point of teaching is a profession, not a job, Nick, you.
Well, certainly, absolutely, is a profession. The question about the syllabus, you just get on with it. I mean, it always surprises me that in every other profession, you start work after you've left your training, and you're not just told to get on with it. I was never told just to go and do an audit of a major PLC as a graduate going into PMO or KPMG as it was then. You are told to do it like this, and you will learn over 3 years how to become a proper accountant. And the same in law, the same in medicine. And so it always surprises me when I hear the stressful first 2 or 3 years that teachers have when they start in a school. Inviting politicians in to this issue of education. James Callaghan invited politicians in 1976, the Great Education Debate. Why did he do that? Because there was deep, deep dissatisfaction with what was happening to education at that time. And that's what the problem was. It got out of touch with what parents wanted for their schools because of all the different, not comprehensivisation as such, but some of the other progressive orthodoxies that came in. You saw the terrible William Tyndale, all those kind of scandals that happened at that time. That's what led to politicians having to start to look at what's inside the black box of the curriculum and so on that happened then. Ofsted, I think we've got more in common, Kevin. I've got more in common, we've got more in common with the NUT than is commonly perceived. Please don't say that to anybody. But my whole credibility will just go up in flames. But I think it's true. I mean, I am concerned about Ofsted and this notion that there is an Ofsted prescribed plan and so on and lesson. Michael Wilshaw has done a huge amount to dispel that. I think there is more to do to lift burdens of Ofsted from schools and from teachers, and there's more reform to happen, I believe. We need to do a lot of thinking about that, and I'd be delighted to work with you. And these 3 working groups on marking and so on and resources are all about trying to lift that burden. And it's a genuine thing. You shouldn't underestimate how serious Nicky Morgan is about lifting the workload burdens from teachers. And these workload groups are going to deliver a step change in those burdens in the next few months and years. Conservative teachers, there is, as Toby has said, there's that wonderful new group been established. And there are lots of bloggers now, the Jonathan Porters, the Katie Ashford, the Joe Kirby's. I don't know what their own politics are, some of them are on the left, but they are very pluralistic, and they want there to be more debate about approaches to education. So I think it is as I said at the beginning, it's a good time to be a teacher, and that applies to teachers from whatever political background they come from.
Thank you. Seeing as Pam's not here and it is a million plus event, I do just want to reiterate something that she'd said earlier, because I think she would want this message to be put across, which is that you're absolutely right, and this is me invoking her, but I agree with this, so I'm saying it personally. You're absolutely right that there is something about explaining to teachers how to do something. One of the things that Nick and I both share is we both worked for KPMG. I worked there before becoming a teacher. I was a teach next, if you like. And we were absolutely told, these are the processes of how you do things, but that is also what teacher education has done in the past. That is what the universities are doing, and whether it's been agreed with or not in the past, whether it's been progressive or not, universities are willing and open to adapting, developing, moving forwards, and I'm sure they're looking forward to building a productive relationship with you on that. And thank you to everybody on the panel for discussing what was a very bold statement at the beginning. Teaching is a profession, not a job. What I think we've learned is that teaching is also a profession for conservative teachers, shy conservative teachers who are in a union and are part of the branches there as well. And it is not just a job, but it is a job that we've got to make attractive if the future is going to be in ensuring that young people get the best possible education of all. So thank you very much to the panellists and for yourselves for coming along, and a round of applause.
Right.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen.
Sorry,
Oh, right, okay. Could I come and visit your school? Well, if you've got business cards signing up
Yeah, no, that's why I pick up.
Oh, right, Thank you very much.
And we're using it for other